May the words of my mouth and may the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. This is from the gospel that we just heard. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can come across to us. Today we hear this story of a rich man and a poor man named Lazarus. And I don't really want to focus in so much on either of these characters. I want to talk about this great chasm that exists between them. Because it's in this gap between the rich and the poor that really needs our attention, I think. This gap between the very rich, and the very poor, that is where most of us just spend our lives. And throughout history, the widening of this gap between the rich and the poor, that has led to the downfall of societies. It has led to revolutions. It has led to coups. It has led to government takeovers, violence. And so in many ways, I think our attention to this gap is necessary for our common existence as a society. I imagine most of us kind of like existing in this gap at some point have felt the kind of that uncomfortable tension there. You find yourself in this place all of a sudden where there's kind of like opulence, right? Or you're in this lap of luxury all of a sudden, and then you think to yourself, I wonder what the poor people are doing right now, right? I wonder what they're having for dinner while I eat this, right? When I was in seminary in New York City, my kids were very young. I mean, this is a while back. My kids were very young. My daughter was preschool age. And I don't know if you know anything about preschool in New York City, but it is a thing. I mean, people will hire agents to get their kids into the right preschool in that town. And so my wife, though, she was very determined, and she hustled and got our daughter a full scholarship into one of the best preschools in the country, probably, where the tuition for that preschool would have been more than what her tuition for college is now. Think about that, right? So imagine the people who send their kids there. These are billionaires. This is crazy wealth, right? They had standalone houses in Manhattan, a house in between skyscrapers, right? Yachts, helicopters, crazy stuff. A staff to run their house. And so I remember once we were invited over, by some of the parents of one of Gracie's friends in preschool. And I found myself there for dinner, and I'm in their living room, and I'm looking at these little like gold statues, and I'm thinking, those are real Oscars, actually, on the shelf there. And so that was how we were spending the evening, right? And then in New York, I was in seminary, so by day I was working in a church for the homeless. And what I would do is I would wheel this kind of mobile altar, a lot like our welcome desk out there, a whole lot like that. I'd wheel that down Fifth Avenue, ka-ching, 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 all the way down Fifth Avenue into Madison Square Park, and the homeless would come, and we'd have church. I got to know the unhoused people of that part of Manhattan by name, right? That's how I spend my days. And so on the way home from this dinner, we are taking the subway because that's how we traveled. And there, across from us on the subway, is that guy who probably had not had a shower since the 90s. And he was kind of passed out, drunk, with a bottle and a brown paper bag. And over him kept going by on the little ticker sign thing, "Mind the gap." Mind the gap. Some of you have probably seen this sign, right? It's the one, they're on trains and subways around the world that remind us to look out for that little space between the train and the platform, right? Mind the gap, that chasm. That is the work that Jesus is calling us to today. And so I think when we as Christians are at our best, it forms this bridge. It forms a bridge where at the same time the church reaches out its hand to the poor, and with the other hand it provides an alternative vision for the rich. That's what our scriptures are all about today. And this gospel today, Luke sets up this parable by illustrating really two different worlds. There's the world of life, right? And there's the world of death, Hades. And then there's like a world within each of these worlds and within each of these realms. In both life and death, there's the world of comfort and the world of affliction. In both. And comfort and affliction in one world is not what it is in the other. This is what biblical scholarship often calls the theme of reversals. And we see this all throughout Luke's gospel, where the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, right? This is the theme of reversals. It's in the Sermon on the Plain. It's in Mary's Magnificat, where God has scattered the proud and put down the mighty and exalted the lowly. Richard Rohr, he calls this Luke's bias towards the bottom. And he writes that Luke uses every story he can to show that what impresses people does not impress God. And that people who think they are at the top, this is Richard Rohr, people who think they are at the top are often, in God's eyes, at the bottom. And people who think they are at the bottom, in God's eyes, are often at the top. He writes, this is an attempt to subvert our human admiration of power, ambition, and glory. And so the gospel that we proclaim as a church is always one that minds the gap between these two worlds. It is the good news of hope for the poor, and for the rich, it is good news that life is more than just money and power. Minding the gap is the prophetic voice of justice that recognizes the suffering of the poor and their lacking, and the suffering of the rich when they just can't see past what money can buy. And this message is as radical today as it was in the first century. It's a message that just doesn't go away. And I think we're kind of left to wonder, maybe was Abraham right in this parable today? Is that gap, that chasm, fixed? Is it permanent? And will the rich man's 5 brothers, it's like, will they ever have their ears opened? Richard Trench, at one time he was an Anglican poet. He was also the Archbishop of Dublin. And he sees this gap not so much as being the gap between rich and poor, but he sees the real gap as being between the rich man's world of comfort and power and God's world. Trench sees that this rich man's blindness to the poor at his gate is really just a symptom of not knowing God's world. His blindness is a symptom of not having faith in the things that God places at the top. And so, because the rich man does not believe in this invisible world of righteousness and truth and spirit, because he does not believe in that, he does not know God's world. He must then put his trust in the things that he can see, taste and smell. So I think this means that if the church is going to mind the gap between these worlds, the task is ultimately to help people see across the gap to God's world and to see the world that God values, to see the beauty in this world that God values, to see the justice that God values, to see the people that God values. Last week, after our service, after church, we had our Give Hope Global presentation from our group that went over to Ghana and does this work just going over sometimes twice a year to Ghana. I got to go with them last summer, and so it's amazing work. And one of the things that happens over there during the day, you kind of spend your days working in these medical clinics and schools, and it's like they barely have a roof. I mean, just barely, if they have one at all. And they barely have clean water. So we go from that environment during the day, and then every night our group would be invited, every night, we'd be invited to a different compound. Not just a house, but a compound. This is like a gate with a big house and gardens, and one had this endless pool that looked out over the mountains there in Ghana. It was amazing. These houses put the houses on Lake Norman to shame. And we were fed dinner each night by Ghana's elite. We were there in this one house one night, and someone was like, "Hey, come, you got to look at this." And so it pulled me over into this room off to the side, and there's a picture of our host shaking hands with King Charles. And so over there, your daily existence is in the tension, in the gap. And that tension is very real. You feel it. You go from one extreme to the other every day. And as I have talked to the people who keep going over there back every year, these are like the Flannerys and the Hatleys, and they're doing this work, and they tell how over time, going back again and again, how over time these very rich Ghanaians, they see these American Christians coming over year after year and doing this work. And then they begin to see the need in their backyard. And they begin to see the potential, the possibility. And then they have begun to join in. They have donated who knows how much in brick and mortar to build these schools and these clinics. They are improving the lives of the poor who are literally at their gates. Lillian Ferdinand, Dr. Lillian, she said it best. She said, "We are building bridges. We're building bridges. The task of the church, our job as Christians, is to help the world see the people at the gates, the people that this world overlooks, and then build bridges across the chasm. Amen.